Our movie begins with Henry, an experimental hardcore cyborg, and the scene is set with the first-person point of view. He wakes up in a lab, and a beautiful woman and scientist, Estelle, claims to be his wife. However, he has no memory of anything related to his past, especially how he got there. She helps him settle some final touches to his newly enhanced body to function normally like a human being. She then gives him their wedding ring and says loving words to him. She then takes him to another room where he's introduced to two other scientists who will help install his voice. But unfortunately, a security breach occurs before the procedure can happen, where Akan and his mercenary team put them in danger. Akan explains that he supplied the raw materials needed for Henry, which kind of means he owns them somehow. Also, Henry should be of service to him. He then attacks one of the scientists by demonstrating his telekinetic power and swiftly stabs him to death. Luckily, Estelle finds a way for them to escape by playing a loud sound in the room and distracting them. The couple rush to get out of there, and they pass through a cold storage with frozen deceased humans. She explains that Akan plans to make an army of cyborgs like Henry. Shortly after, they enter an escape pod where they leave the facility, and eventually the pod ends up crashing into a sky bridge. Luckily they survive, but encounter more of Akan's mercenaries. Henry at this point was too weak to efficiently throw powerful punches, so he gets overpowered by them. He's thrown off the bridge, separating him and Estelle. He then tries to stay hidden from the mercenaries and goes into the tank. Inside, he gathers enough courage to fight them alone and surprises them with an abandoned car. Still outnumbered, he tries to escape but gets run over by them. Fortunately, Jimmy, an old friend, arrives and rescues him. In the car, Jimmy checks the status of Henry's condition, and they find that Henry's almost out of battery and might die. However, Jimmy assures him that he'll fix him in his lab, and suddenly a police car stops them and things quickly escalate with Jimmy's death, showing that these cops are actually Akan's accomplices. Henry rushes to escape to the subway, where he changes clothes inside a stall. The police continue to hunt him down, forcing him to fight against the authorities. On a bus, he sits peacefully with a few passengers, and suddenly a strange homeless man comes in and sits in front of him. He claims to be Jimmy and randomly extracts a tracking device inside Henry's wrist. Apparently, it was this tracking device that Akan used to always locate him. He then gives him a mission to kill Slick Dmitri, Akan's important Russian connection who handles all his assets. Henry must take the charge pump under Dmitri's heart. He also gives him a cell phone that displays Dmitri's location to guide him. And suddenly, he notices a weird man walking on the road wearing an equally weirdly fashioned fire-resistant suit. He deliberately attacks them with fire, and he doesn't care because he's wearing an anti-fire suit, and he completely sets the bus in flames with Jimmy inside. Henry again escapes to the park, where he steals people's clothes. Shortly after, he arrives at Dmitri's territory and trespasses by climbing the building. Once inside, he skillfully takes down the tight security and enters Dmitri's room. Surprisingly, Dmitri appears to be dead, and Estelle suddenly flashes on the screen, distracting Henry, and Dmitri takes this chance to attack him, and they engage in a series of shootings, and soon after, the chase begins. Henry chases him everywhere, even above the frame structure of the bridge, and things conclude on the street when Dmitri was no longer able to fight and bargains for his life in exchange for information on Akan. Unfortunately, his head blows up before he can share anything useful, causing a huge commotion. After a shootout, Henry successfully extracts the changing pump from him. Moments later, he receives a message from Jimmy instructing him to go to a high-class establishment. Inside, he discovers that it's a brothel where he finds another version of Jimmy, but this time he's a cokehead. And despite his unstable condition, Jimmy tries to help him since he's almost out of power. However, he wasn't really sober enough. And so, a sober and neat Jimmy appears and finishes installing the changing pump. Henry wakes up confused by seeing multiple clones of Jimmy, and Jimmy tries to explain the situation, but the mercenaries arrive and Henry makes his way through by killing them. Upon entering another room, he finds a naked man negotiating with Akan, but he gets instantly killed by Akan's telekinetic powers. Akan then flings Henry into an air vent where he lands at a parking lot, meeting another insane version of Jimmy. There, they threaten and torture one of Akan's mercenaries, who spills the beans about Akan taking Estelle to his base. Shortly after, two female assassins interrupt and argue with Jimmy as they are furious with the messy situation in the brothel. Jimmy calms them down, and the pair join them on their hunt. On the road, they attack Akon's convoy with a machine gun, eliminating them one by one. However, things didn't really go as planned, and Henry was left to fight against the mercenaries on his own. When he gets to the biggest convoy vehicle, he finds Estelle locked in a glass room. Then he decides to break the glass, and he's reunited with Estelle. Estelle tells him that she missed him so much because they were separated for so long, and Akon quickly interrupts their reunion as he displays himself on the screen. Suddenly, he gets inside the vehicle with his strong right-hand man. They beat up Henry and threaten to harm Estelle with a baseball bat. But Henry wanted to take her place, and they end up throwing him outside. And because of this, Henry starts to remember things like how he was bullied as a child. Then he wakes up to find that the mercenaries are dragging him to bury him alive. Fortunately, again, Jimmy intervenes with one of his female assassins and kills the mercenaries. They immediately come to Harry's aid and supply power back to him, and they even find out that he has a memory blocker. Henry dozes off to recharge and wakes up moments later with the two making out. And out of nowhere, Jimmy accidentally steps on an explosive, killing him and the female that he was with. Henry escapes, again, and encounters more mercenaries out to get him. He's shocked by the massive tank relentlessly chasing after him. Still, he swiftly eliminates them and the mercenaries from the helicopter. And he eventually catches the rope to the chopper and gets a few feet high above the ground. But he couldn't stay long as one of the men cuts the rope, leaving him to fall on the ground. Surprisingly, he has no injuries and receives a call from Jimmy instructing him to keep going. And just in time, a horse arrives. He attempts to ride it, but he kept falling miserably, showing how bad he is with animals, so he decides to finally walk. Further into the forest, he finds another version of Jimmy, again, who's currently sane but camouflaged and leaves for some reason. He follows him around until they get to an abandoned hotel. There they find the police officers who were using their authority to take advantage of minors. And as they were about to violate a young girl, Henry acts impulsively and brutally kills these disgusting men. They save the girl and tell her to leave as they continue roaming the building to a secret passage. Inside, it reveals Jimmy's hidden lab and a video recording of when Jimmy worked for Akon in the past. It shows how Jimmy's brilliant mind actualized Akon's sinister idea to create a cyborg army from deceased men. However, as it was a case of trial and error, they created mindless zombies, much to Akon's disappointment. Out of frustration, Akon trapped Jimmy with them and crippled him by breaking his spine with his powers. Jimmy finally reveals himself as a cripple, hungry for revenge against Akon. He elaborates more on his successful invention by experimenting with himself, creating cyborg clones that function efficiently and are like humans in all the aspects of their lives. He then introduces all his clones through a musical routine who are all very different in talent and personalities. However, things go wrong as one of the clones accuses him of being a traitor for broadcasting them to Akon and revealing their location. Henry firmly denies the allegations as he has nothing to do with it, but the clones start attacking him because they wanted him to shut down. But still, Jimmy decides to trust him and instructs him to make sure that Akon doesn't get to the lab. Then Henry works together with Jimmy's clones and puts the bombs on the walls of the lab. Then the clones warn Akon that they will come and get him. They immediately rush to the rooftop with their sniper guns to counter as many mercenaries as they can in order to survive in close combat. They take them down one by one as the men scatter around the area, and one of the clones goes on a rampage, killing them. However, they could not prevent all of them from penetrating the building, so they prepare to take Jimmy with them. Henry and two other clones come with him to protect Jimmy on their way to escape the building. The clone reminds him that Jimmy is their utmost priority. As Jimmy, accompanied by another clone, descends via elevator, the pair go on to hunt more mercenaries on their way. They perfectly team up, bombing and shooting every mercenary that they see. They try to do everything they can, even in close combat, to protect the elevator where Jimmy is. With their skills and perfect timing, they make it in time to the ground floor without any harm done to Jimmy. However, more mercenaries are already waiting for them, and they are almost caught in the corner. Fortunately, they quickly activate the bombs at the lab, allowing them to escape as the building collapses. They rush to their vehicle and get on the road to Akan's headquarters. They bomb and attack Akan's vehicle on their way, and by nightfall, they get to his base. They enter the building, and they're welcomed by an army of dead men on the ground, ready to rise tomorrow as cyborgs in the service of Akan. Suddenly, they are attacked with flames and struggle as they are outnumbered. Still, they proceed to fight, and Henry tries to protect them with a bulletproof shield. They immediately get to the elevator to Akan's office. Unfortunately, Jimmy and the clone are fatally injured. Jimmy takes the opportunity to thank him for being his friend and tells him to make sure he looks Akan in the eyes when he kills him. Shortly after, he enters Akan's office, where a huge screen displays Akan and his cyborg army ready to engage. Akan also reveals that they have all the same memories that Henry has, and they're waking in the lab with their wife Estelle, doing the exact same things they did. And all of a sudden, Akan appears in the room and a buff cyborg joins them. Akan ascends the stairs as he orders the cyborg to destroy Henry. The buff cyborg may look tough, but it only took Henry a few minutes to get the upper hand. However, an army of lunatic cyborgs swarm outside the office, which sends him the urgency to recharge using the double-dead cyborg's charging pump. He rips open its chest and does the same to his. Upon recharging, he rushes to the top as the army breaks in. He chases after Akan but gets thrown back into the army and is surrounded. In an instant, they attack him and he struggles in a long battle with hundreds of them coming at him. Fortunately, he skillfully counters and overpowers them, relentlessly keeping up with their numbers while trying to get to Akan. He eventually gets in a room with guns and uses them to finish off the remaining cyborgs, which seemed like it took forever, but he does kill everyone. Sort of. With little strength left, he gives his all as he fights to the very end until Akan intervenes and springs him up and down to the ground until he loses consciousness. Shortly after, Estelle appears intimate with Akan, revealing their real relationship. And it turns out that the twisted couple tricked him into getting his unwavering loyalty. Akan then lets him know that he was indeed their most successful experiment, fulfilling the beginning of their sinister plan and the end of history. He kicks him to the side and Henry finally sees his face on a piece of glass. Upon seeing his face, it reminds him of a vivid memory of his father when he motivated him in the past when he was bullied. With enough fighting spirit left in him, he comes back up even stronger and more eager to avenge himself. He immediately charges Akan, swiftly overpowering him and taking his hand and splitting it in half. Akan suddenly explodes and levitates the cyborgs around him, so Henry uses them to step on their bodies to catch him. Once he gets to him, he cuts his head, ultimately killing him. He then targets Estelle in the chopper, bringing her the news of Akan's passing. Estelle doesn't take the news well and shoots Henry multiple times, sending him to the ground. But when she shoots him again out of frustration, Henry uses the metal gear in his hand to ricochet the bullet right at her. And the movie ends as she becomes disoriented and hangs at the chopper's edge, begging him to save her, but he chooses to ignore her and shut her out. And that is how this amazing movie comes to an end. Leave me a comment if you like cyborgs, cause I love cyborgs, guys, come on. And I love you guys so much. I'll see you on my next recap. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to my channel. Bye.